How do we go about talking to people who are different from us? This is a big question that we all face. I know a lot of people have brought this up with me. They've got family, friends, neighbors who have a different point of view, different belief, and they're really just not sure. And we're uncomfortable on having that conversation. And how do we actually do it? Well, I actually wonder if we should be. What if the person that we're talking to is just as uncomfortable with us as we are with them? Hi, I'm Rob Volpe. Thanks for joining me. This is a video version of my newsletter, Reading Between the Lines. And I've recently read two different memoirs that have very important lessons that we can learn about connecting with people who are different from us. I'm a huge fan of reading, obviously, as an author myself, and in particular, nonfiction and memoir really does such a great job of taking us into a space where we can understand the thoughts and feelings of another person. And it is so critical to helping us out in understanding others, and we can actually apply that to our conversations with other people. So the first book that I want to talk about is David Litt's new book. It's called It's Only Drowning. David Litt is a former speechwriter and joke writer for the Obama administration. And he's written a couple different books. This is his latest. It just came out this summer of 2025. And in it, it's his story of learning to surf and doing that in order to find some focus in his life, as well as to get closer to his brother-in-law. The reasons for this he goes into, but he was really looking to find some meaning in his life and some focus coming out of the pandemic and the discomfort that that had created for him. And I actually related to that. I've written about it in the past, and I think it's actually something that we all need to be reflecting on is what were those things that sort of traumatized us during the pandemic? And have we actually processed those and found a way beyond it? Additionally, his brother-in-law, Matt, is a big fan of Joe Rogan and the Joe Rogan podcast. And that's completely opposite to who David, the author, is. And so he wasn't understanding where Matt was coming from, and he thought surfing would be a way to help bring them together. Now, part of what I really liked about the book, David's really vulnerable, and we get to see what's going on in his mind and the anxieties that he's got, the fear, the nervousness about surfing and catching those first waves and learning how to surf, but also about the conversations and talking with not only his brother-in-law, but some of the other surfers in that bro culture that can exist in surfing and his own um, stereotypes that he had about who some of those people are. Now, I know this is something that a lot of people struggle with. As I mentioned, keep having conversations around how do I talk to other people that have different points of view. And David actually shares and chronicles a few of the different conversations that he had. And so, one of the tips that came to my mind while I was reading sparked from a story that he tells in the book about how Matt, the brother-in-law, asks David for his thoughts about whether or not Trump might go to jail after the first round of indictments came out a couple years ago. And David goes on and he shares some of his reasoned thinking and rationales and then ends the conversation. They were at dinner and dinner had wrapped up, so they got up and left. But later that night, David was reflecting on the conversation and he realized that he never asked Matt what Matt thought about it. So he never asked for Matt's own point of view. And this is so huge. And I'm so, so glad to see that he called that out and admitted that, hey, wait a minute, I never did this. Because as difficult as these conversations can be, we've got to keep our curiosity alive. We want to ask other people for their opinions, and it's so important that we stay open to the answer. Otherwise, we're just monologuing, and that's not something that people respond to properly. They're not going to be receptive to that if you're just reaffirming your own worldview. I would also caution people to be mindful about how you're presenting your own views and what you want the other person to do with that. Again, nobody likes to be lectured, so please be aware of your tone of voice and how absolutist you might be coming across. Because if you come off as closed or uninterested and that it's your way or the highway, well, how in the world are they possibly going to respond to that? There's no recognition of them, and having empathy is about seeing and hearing other people. So you have to give people the opportunity to share their own perspective, and you have to honor them by taking the time to listen to it. There's some other times during the book where David's being judgmental of others, as I mentioned, other surfers. And that was coming up because of like their appearance. It might have been their hair or their musculature. And then it provokes, because of his own stereotypes, it provokes some bias that comes up for him and some judgment. And it gets triggered for him and the way that he might dismiss other people. So again, it's important to dismantle your judgment at all times. Don't project onto other people based off of a stereotype. So really critical. I thought there were some great lessons there. It's Only Drowning is also a book about perseverance and the importance of being open to new things, not just new conversations with people, but new activities and experiences, and finding that common ground from which you can build on. I also related to the book because of my own experiences trying to surf. God, about 12, 13 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, tried to learn to surf. I was fortunate, got to learn in the gentle waves off of Waikiki Beach. And they're lovely rollers. They just kind of come in and carry you onto the shore or towards the shore. So it was really beautiful. Thought, hey, great, I know how to surf now. And we ended up going to Costa Rica on the Pacific coast in an area called Nosara, I think was the town, and there's a lot of different surf camps there. And I was laughing as I was reading this book because David goes to one of those same surf camps in Nosara and has a chance to practice his surfing there. And he writes about the conditions. And I think he had a better experience than I did, but it still made me smile and laugh and try to process through some of my own experiences at surf camp. So, to sum it up, if you are seeking to rebuild or establish relationships with family who have different viewpoints than you, certainly finding a shared hobby or interest is important. But what you're looking for is to find common ground, something that you've got in common that you can that can remind you that you don't have to be scared of the other person or intimidated to engage them. And the common ground, the surfing or whatever the shared experience or language is, can become a way to broach the subject. Just always keep in mind, approach the conversation from that place of curiosity rather than affirming your own view. And please leverage the 5 steps to empathy. Every single one of them is useful in this situation. And if you haven't read my book, it's filled with my own stories trying to understand people who are different from me and how I came to understand those 5 steps of dismantling judgment, asking good questions, actively listening, integrating into understanding, and using solution imagination. Finally, a reminder, studies have repeatedly found that people are unhappy with the divide that exists in the United States amongst individuals due to the political and societal things that are going on. It's not practical, probable, or realistic that like one side is going to truly emerge victorious and crush the other side out of existence. I don't think any of us would want that. So we've got to find ways to establish empathy so that we can work together and solve the problems that we're all facing. Now, the second book that I wanted to share is by Ricardo London called My Mistakes, Your Lessons. And in full disclosure, I do know the author. Ricardo has been a participant in the Navigating to New Normal study that I've been leading for the past 5 years. So I was really excited that he wrote this book. It came out earlier in 2025. And he shares his story and he gets really honest. And I'm letting you know about this book because it's probably going to challenge you and some of your own preconceived notions as well as the abilities of your or the limits of your ability to understand someone else's point of view. I know it definitely did for me. Additionally, the content of this book might help somebody out there who needs it. And so I do encourage people to read it. So Ricardo is an anti-recidivism counselor here in California, works with youth and adults who are at risk for either returning or falling into a life of crime and incarceration. And in this memoir, in this book, Ricardo traces his journey from innocent youth to the abusive events which injured him, and then how he made some bad decisions to try to soothe that pain and get back at his father, who was his abuser. And that led him into criminal activity. And he got involved in gangs and he was in and out of jails and prisons and youth facilities. And ultimately, he served 43 years for a double murder that he participated in back in the 1970s, right here in San Francisco. And so the second half of the book chronicles Ricardo's experience in prison and how he decided, for the sake of his own son, that he wanted to turn his life around. And so he shares how that journey came about, and he ends with a plea for parents to consider how they're treating their own kids. And, children listen and they respond and react to the things that we say and that we do. And sometimes they can take those decisions in a negative direction. And so, as I said, I'm not going to lie. The book challenged me and the preconceived notions that I have myself about criminals and murderers and also prison. Life in prison just sounds terrifying. And Ricardo shares part of it, but I have a feeling he's also held back some of it. But he is honest about times that he was in solitary or removed from the general prison population, or the way that the inmates kind of organized themselves into different gangs and the relationships that they had with and against each other. And then he also writes about his experiences working with people in the prisons themselves, the guards and the support teams, the bad and the good, including working with people that have helped him over the last 20 years on his journey out of that life. The book really made me reflect on how I think about convicts and felons and the judgment that I hold toward them. It made me ask myself about my own beliefs, in a person's ability to reform. Can they change course truly? And how I might regard that person today as I know them and hold that along with their actions in the past. Um, and it was fascinating to observe in myself the ways that I was reacting and responding to things. And, I've known people that have been convicted of felonies and have served time in prison. But Ricardo is the first person I've known that was convicted of a murder. Um, and so and also because I know Ricardo, I've talked to him numerous times now. We've got a relationship that's been established, but reading in and being in the moment really did make me reflect on some of my own beliefs, and hearing his story and the way that he shares about his pain, and he's really open about it. And it gives us an opportunity to reflect on the outcome of the actions of adults on kids, and that abuse that his father heaped on him, and how that manifested into decisions that took him down a very dark path. And I don't think we often get that opportunity to understand that about people who have ended up in prison for whatever the crime is that they've committed. What's the broader picture? How are you understanding? What's the context of who that person is? And even the most horrible acts, like a murder, does that ultimately define who that person is for the rest of their life? It's really heady, deep things to be thinking about. And Ricardo was also like so honest in the book. I felt like he was really open about losing the relationships that mattered most to him, which was notably his own mom, who he was quite close to, and she died while he was incarcerated. And also, he talks about missing out on being involved in his son's life and how that actually helped him turn things around. He also shares his remorse and efforts to make good by helping others not make the same mistake. That's his anti-recidivism work now. And I know from conversations that I've had with him as part of the New Normal study that he does continue to work on that every single day. So, what I learned from all of this as it relates to empathy is twofold. One, it's a reminder that we can have empathy with people with very different experiences, far, far, far afield from our own. But the further we get away from our lived experience, the more work we have to put into having empathy. Also, if we want people to understand where we're coming from, to have empathy with us, we've got to be willing to be vulnerable ourselves, to put our story out there, warts and all. And then, as the reader or viewer, stay open and curious to understanding so that we aren't rejecting someone and instead we're finding ways to come together and maybe reach positive outcomes jointly. So I'd love to have a conversation with people who have read this book. It really just brought up a lot of questions for me and interesting thoughts and feelings as I was sharing here. So if you're open to picking it up, let me know. After you've read it, I'd love to find some time that we can discuss. You can find both of the books on Amazon, and I've put links below in the comments. So that's it for this edition of Reading Between the Lines. Let me know how you liked this video version with a copy available in the newsletter. And if you're coming across this video separately on YouTube, please give this a follow and you'll see new content coming soon. You can also find the link to subscribe to Reading Between the Lines in the notes below. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day and may you find a moment to use that small dose of courage that we all have inside us to use empathy with somebody else. Take care.